Right, good afternoon, everybody. A very, very warm welcome to everyone that's joined us for this very important and timely Powering Up the North, where genuinely we are leading the way to net zero. And this is a high-level summit. Really, really pleased to see so many business, political leaders across the Northwest, alongside industry colleagues and academic experts with us today. This really is about generating debate. So we're going to try and keep our speakers as tightly timed as possible to give all of our audience an opportunity to come in. Want to say a huge thank you to Electricity Northwest for hosting today's event. And it's actually going to be co-chaired. There is a triumvirate of us. I'm delighted to say all females today. So I'm joined by Miranda and Lou. Between the three of us, we'll be co-chairing today's event. And we're really delighted to have worked thus far with Electricity Northwest in taking forward this net zero debate. And what we're going to do, hopefully, is demonstrate how the collective input of all of our partners have informed the business planning process. So what you've got in front of you is the agenda for today's event. We've got three excellent panel of speakers, which comprise political, business and industry leaders who are driving the agenda across the Northwest. I'm going to invite Miranda and Lou to introduce themselves, but for those that don't know me, I'm Jo Lappin. I'm the Chief Executive of the Cumbria LEP. I'm very, very pleased to have been on this journey with Electricity Northwest through our local Cumbrian events. But if I could turn to Miranda and Lou so that they can both briefly introduce themselves.
Thank you, Jo. I'm Miranda Barker. I'm the Chief Executive of East Lancashire Chamber of Commerce and also the lead director on Lancashire Net for Energy and Low Carbon. And we've been really supportive of the way in which Electricity Northwest have been working in our community to spur on the public sector, to ensure with their business plan we're going to have the essential equipment to enable us to move to net zero, and to support the business journey to help those businesses transition to net zero also. On to Lou.
Thanks, Miranda. So I'm Lou. I chair the Greater Manchester LEP. Like many people here today, we're very passionate about this agenda. We put it at the centre of our economic vision to drive economic recovery and growth for the coming years. I think from our perspective, we see that business has a really important part to play in the debate. So it's brilliant to see such a strong business voice represented today alongside our politicians and public sector. So great to be here.
I think Jo might have left us. So in the essence of trying to keep us moving along, do we have a video before we're going to hear from Peter?
Yes, we do. We were just going to run through a few housekeeping rules as well. Obviously, you can pick that up if you like, Miranda.
Certainly, no problem at all. As you can see, the session is being recorded and will be shared online as soon as it's available. Please do use the hashtags. I won't read them out, but please do use them so we can get that debate online aired and seen by as many people as possible. And please use the chat function to share your opinions and comments, and that's where we'll obviously pull any questions or comments into the discussion as we can. And please indicate who your questions are aimed at by typing in the full name before the question, because it really helps us if we're fielding it to particular people, so we're not running through the whole panel on every question.
And can I say a massive thank you to Miranda for stepping into the breach. I have had no IT connection problems in months, and the day it decides to have a wobble is when we're doing this. So thank you very much. Before we come to Peter Emery, Chief Exec at Electricity Northwest, delighted to present this fabulous video that offers perspectives from a wide range of partners. So over to this fabulous video. Thank you.
We're looking at probably the greatest moment of transition on our electricity network that we've ever seen. And there are so many areas where the solution seems to be electricity, whether that's vehicles, whether that's changing heating. All of those put an extra demand on your supply. And yet we know already that there are areas where businesses have been trying to expand over the last few years and finding it difficult to get the capacity they need locally. But also businesses are facing a real decision now. They're looking at the stick behind them of increasing electricity prices and how do they cope with that, but trying to decide when is the right moment to move into on-site renewable generation, adoption of new technologies, moving to electric vehicles. So they need a lot of support to understand when and how to go on that journey.
The issue of how we can secure a recovery from the pandemic that is both green and fair is probably one of the most pressing that we face as a city region and as a nation. I
think there is an element of bravery that's required, but to be mindful that the audience that you're talking to, particularly amongst smaller business, is that they are very, very heavily weighed down with debt and other issues at the moment. If there's a way that we can find to help navigate a way through that ends up with a green solution, that would be the ideal.
Be really helpful from Electricity Northwest actually to understand what their view of consumption looks like in 2030, 2040, 2050, and where the power needs are, whether it's industrial, heat losses, all of that needs to be borne in mind when we decide what to site where.
I think we're one of the few places in the country that has aligned our plans 2038 with our main energy providers, in our case, Electricity Northwest and Cadent. And I think Ofgem will have a job in also allowing them to invest at the pace they need to meet that plan.
The Electricity Northwest future investment plans are significant for our city region. Green growth in Greater Manchester will need to be powered by a reliable and decarbonised electricity network. We welcome Electricity Northwest's pledge to deliver a high level of customer service for people and businesses across our city region. We also appreciate the additional measures to support customers in vulnerable circumstances, including the £250,000 annual fund to remove barriers that prevent the uptake of low carbon technologies.
If I was to look at any sort of ask of ENW, I would say I know that I deal with the ENW and I know that they engage in apprenticeship schemes. I know that they engage in upskilling and training their workforce. But it needs to be ramped up, it needs to be much more broadened out, and it needs to be more intensive.
The County Council entered into a collaboration agreement with Electricity Northwest just over 12 months ago. And since that time, we've been working strategically to progress a number of projects, initially with a focus on the enterprise zone at Samlesbury. But the relationship and opportunity extends right across the county as we look to better place strategic sites and anticipate necessary utility and infrastructure requirements which will be needed.
We're going to have to put in for electric vehicles something quite sensitive into Cumbria. We've got to make sure that any data management, any gas network, any coordinated benefit for a greener Cumbria is done at the same time.
We know the uptake of low carbon technologies like electric vehicles and heat pumps will increase the demand on our electricity network. Timely investment in the Northwest's energy infrastructure will ensure we maintain a reliable electricity network which will enable our city region to make the transition to net zero by 2038.
Okay, shall I kick off?
Thank you very much. I'm not sure, yes, if Jerry is back with us. Thank you, Peter. That'll be excellent. We're really looking forward to hearing from you.
Okay. So, good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm going to really focus on our Rio ED2 business plan, which is currently under development. Many of you will be well aware of that. And I'm going to really focus my attention on 3 areas. The first is investment. The second is in partnership and leadership. And the third is implementation, which at the end of the day is really what we're all about. So we've proposed an investment programme, £2 billion investment programme for Rio ED2 that will really transform our business, but it'll also enable everybody in the region to take real steps towards net zero. Particularly, I think the focus is going to be really on EVs as the centrepiece, but there will be plenty of other areas that will be enabling. We submit our final business plan on the 1st of December, and now is a critical time really to set that path to net zero. The 2023 to 2028 timeframe, which this business plan unfolds in, is critical to all our stakeholders, many of which are targeting net zero by the late 2030s. So we've got to make real progress during this period. The plan is really guided by enabling net zero front and centre, but also keeping bills down. In our region, we have many individuals are economically challenged, and we need to bear that in mind. So this is going to be a plan for all, and we'll also be driving reliability up as more and more people will rely to a greater extent on electricity. The consultation process we've done, I think, has been unrivaled in its transparency. As we've developed the plan, we've consulted with over 20,000 stakeholders and customers, and they have told us that net zero should be our main priority, but also reliability of the network, resilience of the network, not only the equipment, but also from a cyber perspective, and from our workforce. We need to train and develop our workforce, and we heard that in the introductory video, and it needs to be for all. This is vitally important. This plan can start to address some inequalities to provide access for all, but also quality of supply. With electricity becoming more critical, we have got a variation in the quality of supply. The reliability of our network in the centre of Manchester is in some cases 20 times more reliable than other parts of the network, and yet our network is the second most reliable in the country. So we've got work to do to really level up and provide equal access for all. So if we move on to partnerships and leadership, this is a very important area. During our consultations, it's become very clear to us that the only way to deliver a challenge of this magnitude is through strong partnerships. So we've beefed up our engagement process, and you heard some evidence of that in that opening video. We're in a unique position as a network operator because we are a neutral facilitator. We're technology agnostic. Our job is to help all players make their contribution to net zero. And because of that, we've found that we're in a unique position to provide leadership and support and advice to local stakeholders to help them make the decisions that they need to make, and we will support and help them meet their ambitions. So we've also got a role, I think, through the Ofgem consultation process to make regional voices heard. The fact that most areas are targeting the late 2030s to get to net zero versus the government target of 2050 really shows how important it is to the region. And our job is to try and enable that to happen, which will be a challenge, but our job is to make those regional voices heard. In terms of other partnerships, we've engaged in innovation where we've got 2 major projects, Smart Street and Class, which basically have sophisticated control for voltage, which reduce prices for all customers in the Northwest. We've done that through technical collaboration. So a good example of how collaboration delivers innovation that can benefit all. We've also worked hard with all stakeholders, delivering a vision for decarbonisation pathways and our distribution future energy scenarios. This is important work because it gives a real clue as to how we can get to net zero. And we're already collaborating with local councils who are developing their local area energy plans using the work we've already done. So there's no duplication to speed up the process. We've completed work with BEIS in Greater Manchester. Even earlier today, I've been talking to the councils in Lancashire to offer the same support. There'll be other areas in our plan where networks are not always best placed to deliver, so we need to be careful about how we spend our resources. But we're really focusing on net zero. In terms of implementation, in the near term, we're fast tracking some projects. You may have seen in the press during the first quarter of this year, we're doing 11 strategic projects. It'll be no surprise to realise that they are focused on the electric vehicles, but there are broader applications. We're also actually commissioning right now a new digital system to control our network. It will be one of the most advanced control systems of networks in the world when it's up and running, and that will position us well to help the transition to net zero at lowest cost for our customers, given the controls we've got at all voltage levels. Our business plan starts in just 18 months' time, so we're already gearing up towards it. It was mentioned in the video, we do have a strong apprenticeship scheme. We take on 20 apprentices a year. That's likely to beef up to 30 and beyond. And we're also then using our the opportunity to strengthen the diversity and inclusion of our recruitment processes and our workforce. So just to close out, I think ongoing engagement, of which this forms part, is critical, and it's really going to be the way we operate going forward. We're in a fast changing environment. We're going to be updating our plans every year or two as the industry picture changes, as innovations and new techniques come along. So we need to engage regularly with stakeholders to update our plans and help inform theirs. So just to conclude, we're always open to discussion. That's what today's all about, and working with everyone in the region to see how we can do things better and make sure that everybody takes part in this low carbon journey. Thank you.
Peter, thank you very much. So that was Peter Emery, the Chief Executive Officer of Electricity North West. And can I just say a very quick personal thank you to you, Peter, because you've been absolutely brilliant at drawing together senior stakeholders across the ENW region to keep everyone briefed and informed. So really big thank you. And I'm sure other partners equally appreciate that. So hopefully the tech gremlins have gone and I can do what I was supposed to do earlier, which is to say a huge warm welcome to our keynote speaker, Martin Cave, the chair of Ofgem, who we're absolutely delighted has been able to make the time to join us today, and very, very interested in hearing Martin's perspectives. So Martin, over to you, please.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'm very happy to address you today because this is a topic which, for the reasons Peter has explained, is preoccupying us at Ofgem a great deal at the moment. I also noted Andy Burnham's challenge to us in the video over investment, and I'm hoping to persuade you today that we really are pursuing our goal of net zero at lowest cost to consumers very vigorously indeed. When society moves to clean up transport, heating and power, it'll do so at a local level. In fact, it's difficult to overstate the role of local in driving forward with this change. We want actually to promote this path to net zero through our network price control, while ensuring costs are as low as possible and are shared fairly. We also know that climate change can't wait, and that the region's ambitious plans for net zero must be realized not from now and not from 2023. In May, we brought forward additional investment to support the energy transition through our Green Recovery Scheme, directly benefiting 11 green transport, power and heating projects worth more than £20 million across the Northwest. Starting from now, many of these will mean that towns and cities get new cabling they need to support more electric transport, such as buses and taxis, or increased electrification of heat. It seems to us that the Northwest is well placed to take a lead in the fight against climate change, with bold and ambitious targets to achieve net zero across the region, including by 2037 in Cumbria and 2038 for Greater Manchester. There are a great many examples of forward thinking already taking place across the region. Electricity North West's Smart Street project has for several years now trialled installing voltage control devices at substations that help customers' appliances to perform more efficiently, saving customers money and using less energy too. NWBLT will now take this project forward on a bigger scale. Meanwhile, Ofgem has allocated £2.5 million to support green heating schemes in Greater Manchester, which will see heat pumps installed into social housing estates and high occupancy residential buildings. But in order to meet our climate change targets, we need to see a much wider and fundamental and joined up approach put into effect. Local energy networks play a pivotal role in much of the UK's transition to meeting our net zero emissions by making sure that the infrastructure is in place to put an electric vehicle charge point on a road, to give families access to clean power for homes, and to hook up new green powered energy developments up to the grid. The change this requires is huge, as has already been noted, challenging and very exciting, and we need a range of players to join up to achieve our climate change ambitions, from network companies to tech companies to government and local authorities. Ofgem is working on many fronts to make sure that we have the investment ideas and partnership in place to meet this massive network challenge. This month, we also launched our Strategic Investment Fund to encourage innovators to come forward, working with network companies with big, bold and ambitious plans that will unlock cutting-edge technology and ideas for UK networks. The fund makes £450 million available for innovations that address 4 major strategic challenges, including whole system integration from plant to plug, data and digitalization, heat and transport. This could help make sure such networks are ready to roll out clean heating solutions, such as heat pumps, to Britain's homes. The sum is just a starting point, however, and can be dialed up if there is a need and if innovators bring forward strong ideas. It's just one part of our wider ED2 price control for local electricity networks, which starting in 2023 will see billions of pounds invested in our networks to drive a greener, fairer energy system. The price control will set the blueprint for 5 years and longer for the work that network companies will prioritize to make sure our energy infrastructure delivers safe, secure, and of course, greener electricity to homes, buildings, businesses, and communities around the UK. It's designed to address the unique challenges of turning our system green. These include accommodating a proliferation of new flexible technology and processes, which we'll see over the next 10 years, that simply haven't existed on the same scale previously. Alongside the inevitable upgrades that will be needed, we have to drive local electricity networks to help make sure that every watt of energy produced from plant to plug is better used. For example, by ramping up their use of battery storage, which will ultimately make new grid connections much cheaper. Meanwhile, policy and tech are fast-paced and changing in this area. And one example is the uncertainty over our route to cleaning up GB's housing. Will it be hydrogen, heat pumps, heat networks, a mixture of all three, or some new unforeseen technology? So we're making funding much more flexible so that networks can come to us with strong ideas over 5 years in response to the landscape of the time, and we stand ready to fund them. With the clock ticking on net zero, we are giving more funding and incentives to companies for green energy projects. For example, those that drive big green infrastructure changes, such as the grid reinforcement across the east coast of England to anticipate 40 gigawatts of offshore wind in the North Sea. Above all, we recognize how many cooks go into creating an effective green energy system, from national government to local authorities, businesses and developers, to, of course, the network companies themselves. For example, local authorities rely on their local electricity network to make sure the infrastructure is in place to allow plans such as new developments to happen. And they also have a unique insight into where future demand will be, which is crucial to local network planning. So our new price control incentivizes network companies to go further in coordinating with local partners and with each other. For example, requiring electricity network companies to better share and coordinate data on users' local energy use, including sharing this with flexible providers. And we've already heard how ENW has taken the views of stakeholders in the area. greening our energy system will inevitably require much more investment in our electricity networks. It's our job to make sure that these costs fall fairly on consumers. So we'll scrutinise each demand for funding and only green light projects where companies provide a strong case. Consumers pay for networks through their bills, and it's imperative they get the best possible value for money, especially in these times when prices are rising. We are planning to significantly lower the proportion of money that goes back to the DNO company shareholders, while making sure GB's exceptionally stable and secure energy network sector remains highly attractive to investors. We are thus proposing to reset returns to the levels that markets are apparently setting and are broadly comparable with other European regulatory regimes for the same period. This means cutting returns by a significant amount. So in conclusion, making the transition to a clean energy system for us, our children, and our grandchildren will take a huge collaborative effort with everyone playing their part, from networks to town planners. I'm confident and excited that we can all pull together to achieve this. Thank you very much.
Martin, thank you ever so much. Very, very much appreciate your time. Martin's been joined today by a colleague, Steve Mcmahon, and at the end of today's session, there will be an opportunity for colleagues to ask questions either of ENW or Ofgem. So please do post your questions in the question function. And I've been asked to remind everyone, please do tweet about today's event. So another big thank you to Martin, and onwards with our first panel session. I'm delighted to chair the first session, and the first session is going to look at what more can the Northwest do to unlock green growth and lead the way to net zero. I would add a caveat. I think we already do lead the way, but this is what more can we do? And I've got a fabulous panel to join me. They're all going to give absolutely no more than 5 minutes input, and please, please keep your questions coming whilst they're giving their input. So firstly, I'd like to say a very warm welcome to Paul van Heyningen. Paul is Deputy Director, Net Zero Electricity Networks, BEIS, which, as you'll appreciate, is a very catchy title. We've then got Henri Murison joining us, Director of Northern Powerhouse Partnership. Debbie Francis. Debbie is the new chair of the Lancashire LEP, so welcome Debbie to the LEP family. And finally, and definitely not last but not least, is Polly Billington, Chief Executive of UK 100. So can I hand over to Paul to lead us off? Thank you, Paul.
Thanks very much, Jo, and it's great to be here from Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. I'm speaking to you from London, but I did want to say, hopefully you're all aware of the office that we've opened in BEIS in Salford, and that in the next few years we'll have 25% of our people outside London, the lion's share of which will be in Salford, including a lot of our energy policy. So great to be moving away from a London-centric approach. Really glad to be part of this event and to see ENW's extensive customer and stakeholder engagement as you've drawn up your business plan. And I really do echo the points that Martin Cave and others have made about the real importance of locally led development and local action in terms of meeting our net zero commitments. So looking at the UK as a whole, the key drivers, of course, as people have talked about, our 2050 net zero commitment. But underneath that, we have our carbon budgets, our legally binding targets that sort of set the trajectory towards that. And one point I want to make was that 2050 sounds a long way off, but our 6 carbon budget requires us to reduce total emissions by 78% by 2035. And when you think about what that means for the electricity system, it basically means full decarbonisation pretty much of electricity by 2035. So we know we're all talking about transformation at a sort of unprecedented pace and scale. And as Martin said, it's important that we all really work together in concert to achieve that. So the main point I wanted to stress was really about that, and about the importance of decarbonisation plans and local area energy planning, because clearly national targets like the ones I've mentioned, like the phase out of sale of petrol and diesel cars and vans in 2030, etc., aren't enough to fully inform your plans in the Northwest. We don't live in a fortunately in a centrally planned economy. So absolutely crucial that local and regional bodies work together to plan. Again, as has been mentioned, you have some very strong climate change ambitions in the Northwest region, whether it's Greater Manchester, Cumbria, or Lancashire. But what's really key is that we can build as much certainty as we can, or you can, in fact, in translating those targets to specific policies and processes to deliver those ambitions in the Northwest. The more that can be done, and the more coordination between local authorities and network operators and other stakeholders, then the more easily we can make confident investment decisions as part of ED2 on the distribution network, and make sure that supply chains are ready. In saying that, I'm not absolving government's responsibility to act and lead as well, and there's lots we're doing in that space. So just for example, I'd mention the electric vehicle infrastructure strategy that the Office for Zero Emissions Vehicles, with whom I work very closely, is going to publish soon, and that will set out our sort of overall vision for how we're going to make sure the rollout of infrastructure is going to happen across the country. But it will also set out our thinking on the different roles and responsibilities of actors in this space, including network operators and including local authorities. So I hope that will be helpful to you when we publish it soon. And then just finally, because I'm conscious of time, Joe, and I know you'll be waving at me soon, related to that, I just wanted to mention something that we think is very important, and I know Ofgem are very focused on in thinking about the next distribution price control, which is strategic investment, and the opportunity to reinforce the electricity network now in anticipation of future needs, where we can justify that. And that's not about just speculatively putting wires in place in a way that you might create stranded assets. It really goes back to my point about planning, and the more where we are digging up the road, and we know that demand is going to increase, whether that's from EVs or heat pumps or something else, why not reinforce the network in a way that future-proofs it a bit beyond the next 5-year period. So that is absolutely crucial, and as I say, it all comes down to the clearer the plans we have, the better we're able to invest with confidence. And I hope that brings me to time.
Paul, it certainly does, thank you. And we've already got a question, but I think we'll save that so that we can bring all the questions in when we've heard from all of our panels. So Henri, without further ado, big thank you to Paul. Over to you, please.
Thank you, Joe, and it's great to be with everyone today, and thank you to Peter and to colleagues from Ofgem for their remarks, because I think the opportunity and the challenge that the price control places on all of us, right, is that this is an uncertain environment. So I can tell you what I think aspirationally the economic opportunities might be from net zero, what that will mean in terms of growth opportunities in the Northwest. But the adoption of those technologies and the certainty we have from government will determine the need for infrastructure, and will avoid those stranded assets that Paul was rightly saying we need to avoid, whilst we take sensible options, which particularly where there's very little risk of any regret, where we take those choices now to invest more where there is, whatever the pathway of decarbonisation we may end up taking, those investments will be justified. And I think that my kind of reflections on how we can balance the challenge of very aspirational local targets, the opportunity of local energy action planning, is that in the end, where there are credible plans for local delivery, that does help us to allow the operator of the network to invest with greater certainty. So where we can see credible plans for delivery, and I think there is a plea there to central government as we approach the end of this particular price control debate and the process of submitting business plans, to give as much as possible certainty to the industry as they possibly can, because clearly we all support the aspiration that's laid out in the government's plan that was announced a few months ago, But under that, there does sit an awful lot of detail. And I am very sympathetic to Ofgem seeking to interpret the government's policy intent, because clearly there are policy choices, particularly around, for instance, heat, which have huge implications for the choices that operators are going to have to make, and Ofgem's going to have to make in agreeing their business plans. And the greater certainty we can give local government and our combined authorities about what they're going to be asked to deliver, the clearer they can be at a local level and at the level of place around what their needs are going to be on the operator of the system to be able to provide the right level of infrastructure at the right time. Because I think what we all believe is that we absolutely do have to use what is a regulated asset base to provide for the needs of future customers. And there is, of course, a point that in some cases, greater certainty in the ability to invest earlier will produce better outcomes for customers, because it may be cheaper and easier to provide infrastructure in anticipation of need if there was real certainty than if you had to wait and do it a hurry at the end. And I think my kind of reflection would be that there is a real opportunity for ministers, and we have a new energy minister as of this morning, to Greg and to colleagues, to give as much certainty as possible. Because if it was for me, and that's why I'm positive about the reopeners and the other opportunities that Ofgem have placed in this period on the way they've approached this, there will be things that change for very good reasons within this price control period. And there needs to be the flexibility for the regulator to respond, but also certainty for the companies involved that when defined changes happen, and when there is, for instance, the need for them to invest more than may have been first anticipated, that there will be appropriate mechanisms to fund that are transparent and are well understood and have clear reasoning behind them. So I think those to me seem really important principles, and that interacts right with the rest of the choices we have to make. So I would say very clearly that the hydrogen economy across the north of England is a huge opportunity. It's an area where the north, both the northwest, but also Yorkshire and the northeast, are working together in collaboration. And what I would particularly emphasise is that isn't a sort of a completely dependent or independent of what the electricity sector has to do, because what we've seen really positively in the last few months, in the last few years, is enhanced cooperation between the gas networks and between the DNOs around working collectively and collaboratively around the transition, and seeing absolutely that whatever the path to decarbonisation may take, there is no one single answer to the challenge, and that it will only be by working in partnership across traditional boundaries that companies and the public sector can respond appropriately. And I particularly welcome the really positive collaboration around the hydrogen agenda we see on this side of the Pennines. And I think it's certainly a testament to Peter and his colleagues that when it's come to talking to places about their own aspirations, they've been able to give a coherent view across both the gas and electricity system about what they believe the future could look like based on the plans that have been put in place. And working in that way with close collaboration at the level of the economic geography, I think is vital. And the fact we have 3 chairs from some of the different parts of the region, I think reflects the fact that the decarbonisation pathway will be different in different parts of the northwest as it will be different in different parts of the north. And there are actually probably more commonalities between, say, Cumbria and parts of the northeast than there might be between other parts of the northwest and Cumbria in terms of the specifics of its geography and economic realities and the decarbonisation pathway it will take. And we very much see that the city regions that are highly urbanised and have economies which are based on that nature of density have some significant similarities around the pathway they will take, whereas those places that might be more dispersed and have a significant reliance on industrial users historically in terms of what their grids are used for, as well as more rural communities, do have a different journey they're going to take. And I think having an operator that's prepared to respond differently and work with the public sector on the basis of those plans rather than in trying to insist on some sort of homogeneity, I think is a testament to the way that this plan has been built. And certainly, again, Peter and his colleagues deserve a lot of credit for the way they've approached that exercise. So I'm really positive about the scale of the opportunities, not just around meeting net zero, but what that means for employment and jobs, Joe. And in the conversation that follows, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that. And it's great to see others on the panel later, including Emma and Carl in some of the other sessions. I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about the specifics of the employment opportunities, but it absolutely is the case that customers and stakeholders in the north and in the northwest in particular are not just dependent on the network for meeting net zero. they're also dependent on the network for producing the economics fundamentals of the economy, because in the end, access to the electricity system and the electricity system providing what is needed will determine whether we can be genuinely world leaders in net zero and can then export those technologies and that knowledge around the world. And that's an opportunity that we've got to deliver and work against if we're going to make the most of the opportunities in the next few years.
Henri, thank you very much, and I'm sure we'll revisit some of those issues in the Q&A. But can I welcome Debbie Francis from Lancashire LEP, chair there, who's going to offer her perspective on this. Debbie, over to you.
Hi, I'll be looking to you to nod to say that you can hear me, Joe. Excellent, thank you. Apologies if there's a little background noise, everybody. Best laid plans of mice and men. I'm in London and was hoping to be ensconced in my hotel room quietly for this, but I'm not. I'm in the lobby and I'm in London. So I do hope there's not too much background noise and you can all hear me okay.
It's fine, honestly. Great.
So in respect of, what more can the Northwest do to unlock the green growth and lead the way to net zero? I'm unapologetic for the fact that some of what I'm going to say is somewhat Lancashire focused, but hopefully I'll be forgiven for that, given that I'm chair of the Lancashire LEP. But I do obviously consider, so please bear with me because I will be considering what that looks like for the wider Northwest too. I think that the Northwest overall has got all the ingredients in terms of asset and capabilities to be recognised as a leader in the net zero agenda, and that's going to give us a real opportunity in the region. Lancashire's energy and low carbon sector is very diverse, and it's got a range of subsectoral strengths, which I think in their own right present quite a compelling offer. Lancashire's got significant strength in the large-scale renewables sector, nuclear and other large energy supply industries, and they're complemented by cutting-edge manufacturing and technology. And that means actually that in Lancashire, we can not only facilitate the decarbonisation of our businesses, but we can also provide the expertise to manufacture the components to deploy energy and low carbon technologies across the UK. And if you combine those capabilities with those of the wider Northwest, it's a formidable region, which at the end of the day is well placed to contribute to the ambitions for the net zero economy by 2050. With the right interventions, I think Lancashire and the Northwest already significant capabilities and natural assets can be enhanced, and that will create plenty of green collar jobs. I think Lancashire's energy and low carbon plan contains a range of policy and fiscal interventions that can unlock green growth. So, for example, it would really help if governments enacted firm policies to require low carbon policies in all procurement for all public bodies. And as a region, we can lobby for these types of measures. Typical London background there. Not all the interventions require funding. I mean, we could work smarter to influence change through local policy changes, through local public procurement. And I think while government has to some degree recognised the capabilities of the Northwest by committing to establish the Northwest Low Carbon Industrial Cluster by 2030, we need to build on the momentum of Net Zero Northwest Economic Report and gain further traction and support of the agenda. I mean, within the region, we've established some very well-connected trade associations, such as Northwest Aerospace Alliance and Northern Automotive Alliance. And these members all have a really significant role to play in delivering some of the objectives in the 10-point plan. Jet zero and electric vehicles as classic examples. And we've got to make better use of these networks for disseminating the messages and the opportunities to make sure those within the Northwest supply chain recognise and understand the opportunities that can arise from the green growth. It's not just obvious sectors though. We also need to recognise the contribution that other sectors can play. For example, food and agriculture, it's well positioned to contribute to the agenda through the adoption of low carbon technologies, agri-tech and the production of climate friendly livestock. And the pandemic, I think, has resulted in an increased consumer awareness of food provenance. So we need to capitalise on this to encourage the buy local, not just individual consumers through the public procurement. Lancashire, actually, interestingly, has the highest UK potential new low carbon roles per head of the UK working age population. And therefore, in order to accelerate the UK's take-up of low carbon technologies and transition to net zero, this needs to be considered. And finally, on this topic, I really can't talk about this without making some reference to the part that the North West can play through the skills agenda. So within Lancashire's recent survey, we surveyed 40% of businesses. We said that it was difficult to recruit staff with the skills that they need, and almost a third find it hard to recruit for specialist skills. So to mitigate the recruitment challenges, many of the low carbon businesses are undertaking intensive in-house training. 81% of all the businesses surveyed stated that they're delivering their own training in-house. And of these, 65% of the businesses who run their own training do it to fill gaps not covered by external provision. Having said that, only 36% of those businesses actually engage with schools and colleges to provide career activities for children, and 25 businesses find hiring difficult. Only 9 of them engage with stakeholders in the skills system. So I think it's really obvious from those findings that the skills system needs to better incorporate the workforce needs of low carbon businesses. Low carbon businesses need to step up and work with that skills system to increase that pace towards net zero. In respect of truly unlocking green growth, though, and heading to net zero, we're probably going to need to see if we really understand the drivers of change. Is it going to be achieved through legislation, or is it driven by consumer demand and behaviours? Well, I suspect it's probably a mixture of both. Thanks, Jo.
Debbie, thank you very much. And we've interestingly got one of your board members asking you questions, of which more later. So can I come to our final panellist? Polly Billington, Chief Executive of UK 100. Over to you, please, Polly.
Thanks very much, Jo. For those people who might not have heard of us, UK 100 is a network of locally elected leaders who've made a commitment to act on climate, clean energy and clean air. We've got more than 60 members across all parts of the UK and all tiers of government represented from district council up to combined authority, who have made a commitment to shift to net zero on their own assets by 2030 and across their whole communities by 2045. Now, they know they can't achieve that second goal of doing it across the whole of their communities by 2045 unless the rules are changed. And that's one of the reasons why these kind of conversations hosted by Electricity North West with these kind of stakeholders are so important for UK 100 to be part of, because we believe that with sensible deployment of investment, funding, and indeed private capital, and the right powers allocated to local authorities and changing of the national regulatory and legislative framework, this stuff can happen. But it will not happen at the scale that is needed, not only for us to meet a legal target, which is what 2050 is, but the scientific reality of avoiding runaway climate change. This is what has to happen. The good news is, however, that this has got an enormous number of economic and health benefits, as many of the other contributors have mentioned. So if we look initially about money and finance, I know that everybody here will be thinking about this in the context of investing in the energy system. But before we get to that, in the next few weeks, the government is going to announce the comprehensive spending review and those investments there. It is absolutely imperative that if the energy sector is going to be able to engage with local authorities to do what we know that local authorities need to do, that comprehensive spending review recognises that and invests in effectively the local delivery infrastructure in terms of capacity and capability at local level so that they can engage with the energy sector. Just a quick reminder of the statutory obligations that local authorities have are mostly about making sure that vulnerable adults and vulnerable children are okay. It doesn't even formally stretch to collecting the bins, let alone having an energy responsibility. And yet we are asking those local authorities who are extraordinarily financially stretched to start thinking about net zero when they've been managing a pandemic and also constrained resources for a long time. So we must ensure that there is a proper settlement for local authorities focused on net zero without absolutely any shadow of a doubt. We also need to think about what that UK infrastructure bank is actually going to do with the £4 billion of capital that it has got allocated for local authorities. Let us make sure that that is development capital, not investment capital, because we need to make sure that we are developing those projects at the scale that is required. And again, so that there is the competence and capacity within local authorities to be able to talk to distribution network operators like Electricity North West and others. And we are also expecting at the same time the net zero strategy ahead of COP26. Now, what we need to see in there is an acknowledgement from national government. It's great to hear Paul say what he's been saying, and it's great to hear from Ofgem that they understand the importance of local action. We need to see some realities in the net zero strategy of an acknowledgement of the importance of local climate action. Nobody will achieve net zero without local authorities being able to transform their places in the way that Henri and others have talked about. So we need to make sure that that net zero strategy absolutely involves some commitments to local capacity building in those areas. We'll expect an energy bill next year. Does that include local area energy planning, and not only obligations to local authorities, because that can be a little bit of a rod for our own back, but also facilities to enable and support local authorities to be able to do that planning. And ultimately, what we've done with our assessment of the powers that local authorities have already got is we have understood what are the limitations they've got in being able to use them. And the biggest one that comes along after constraints on resources is that national rules get in the way. And that's why it's so important to hear from Ofgem that they recognise that the path to net zero is through local. So we need to be able to change those rules. That's what we need to see in ED2. Absolutely. So there is acknowledgement that we are talking about a decentralised, decarbonised electricity system where local democratically elected leaders have a role to play in shaping those communities and making sure that the whole of the country can transition in a way that suits them. My final point is meets up with what Debbie said, which is absolutely we're talking about jobs and skills. If we've now got a jobs and skills gap now, heaven help us if we don't manage to skill up our workforce to be able to meet the demands of this. This is a massive opportunity for the Northwest and beyond to be able to give people a future which is exciting, well paid and good skilled jobs. Let's make sure that local leaders have absolutely the role to play in shaping what those jobs and skills should be.
Holly, thank you very much. I'm very conscious that we're slightly overrunning on time, but worry not, we will recover. There was a question that came in from Jenny Willis, which was for Paul. I know you've answered in chat, but it'd probably be good for all of the audience to hear, Paul. And that was, could you comment on the uncertainty around heat referred to by Martin Cave? Is this an area where government could or should take more of a lead? Paul?
Yeah, thanks, Joe, and thank you, Jenny. Yeah, so as I said in my comment, we will be publishing our heat and building strategy soon. I know people have been waiting for a while, but it is coming. And there are key strategic decisions to be made in the future, as you've said, about heat, particularly in relation to hydrogen. But I think a couple of points I'd make are that whatever happens, and we know that there's going to be a large amount of electric heat pumps in the future and a large switch to them. That's a sort of no regrets thing. And we talked in the PM's 10-point plan about an expectation of 600,000 heat pumps a year being installed by 2028. And there are other no regrets things that can be done in this space, like thinking about areas where there are lots of homes are off the gas grid and where heat pumps are a very obvious solution. So again, you can take things forward with quite a lot of certainty. So I think there's a lot that can be done in advance of key strategic decisions, which will be made soon.
Thank you. And I won't say that one of the co-chairs has absolutely used their position as co-chair to raise questions of their own chair in the LEP. But Miranda Barker, who may be on the screen, has asked, would be great to see Lancashire leading the way with commitments to stringent planning baseline standards for low carbon tech in all new builds and net zero standards enforced in all public sector contracts. Debbie, would you like to respond to that one?
Well, I was taking it more as a statement rather than a question, Joe, to be fair. So I agree with Miranda, it would be great, but I think that that's something that I think, you know, the LEPs across the country will be looking at the same things on how we feed in the information, you know, to our authorities to say this is kind of what businesses can and would like to help support and do. Authorities have obviously got growing pressure. I mean, as it was said before, you know, to do more and more all the time. So, you know, there's a growing pressure there for them now to say how are they going to meet these kind of targets. So I think it's for businesses to feed in the information of how they can help support that the best. And then, yeah, I mean, it would be great, wouldn't it? And I think Miranda's even mentioned that, you know, it'd be good if we could all get a little bit of a competition across the region, because that would mean everybody steps up a level, but I'm not quite sure that would be the way to go. Competition can lead to more battles and winners and losers, and at the end of the day I do think it's a regional thing that we've got to take forward, but I like the sentiment. So yeah, I think it would be great. I think it'd be lovely for Lancashire to lead the way. I think really prominent for us is the fact that we have such a strong base to start with in terms of the skills and the carbon sectors that we've got within Lancashire. So I think it would be great if we could build on that. There's no doubt about it.
Brilliant, thank you, Debbie. And now literally one sentence response from both Henri and from Polly. The question was very much about what the Northwest could do more. What one sentence response would you summarise as to how the Northwest could leapfrog every other area? Henri, you first and then Polly before we hand over.
I think to get those local energy action plans developed more quickly with credible data and information from the public sector about its own investment plans based on that certainty from government that I was nudging Paul to try and provide.
Brilliant, thank you, Henri. And other than more money for local government, Polly, what else, please?
I would actually agree with Henri about this, because Electricity North West have done some really constructive engagement with local authorities. You're much further ahead than other parts of the country on local area energy planning opportunities, and designing those with communities in mind and making sure that there is that democratic accountability in designing those plans. That's where the North West can really lead the way.
Excellent, thank you, Polly. Can I say a massive thank you to Paul, Henri, Debbie and Polly, our first panel. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, Miranda Barker, who's going to lead the second panel. And Miranda, you're doing very well because there's already lots and lots of questions around infrastructure, which I've been very kind and not picked up on. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jo. Thank you to the previous panel. So this is our industry and business panel, and far be it from me to have overstepped my mark, but we had some great responses about that point raised. So we had a response from Johnny Sadler telling us that the UK Green Business Council have translated their UK Net Zero framework into local standards for local authorities, which they've piloted in Manchester. So there's a challenge for the rest of us to equally go and pursue those. So it's really good to have that input, and that's just that's a great example of how Electricity North West around the region have been so supportive and helpful to all of us in the public and the private sector in moving in this journey. So thank you, Johnny. So this panel, our industry and business panel, we have on this panel Ivan Baldwin, the chairman of British Energy's Business Coast Cluster, Emma Degg from North West Business Leadership Team, Ennis from Siemens and Net Zero Northwest, and Gordon Rogers, head of long-term strategy at United Utilities. So we will take our panel in that order, and very much in the same way as with Jo. I'll pose the question in a moment, but please come back 5 minutes maximum so we can hear as many of the questions from the audience as possible and interact with them, which is really important part of this. So please, audience, do pose your questions to this panel, and where you can, do point out who you would especially like to start the answer with. So the question to the panel is, how can the Northwest work better and really collaborate to harness green investment, innovation and infrastructure on the road to net zero and achieve that real business change? So I'd like to start, please, with Ivan Baldwin. Thank you.
Hi, Miranda. Thank you for that. And hello, everybody. Similar to Debbie, I'm actually in a place where I didn't expect to be today. I'm in a car park in North Wales, and I was hoping to be home. So I'm here trying to sell or trying to move forward a new large-scale nuclear power station here. So forgive me for that. So yeah, so I'm the chair of an organisation called Britain's Energy Coast Business Cluster. It's a voluntary role, and it's largely a voluntary organisation that I'm assuming many of you outside of Cumbria perhaps have never heard of. We've been around for 17 years. We have 300 members, and it's an organisation that ranges from very large businesses, so international companies such as my employer Bechtel, right through to small SMEs, technology businesses, professional services, etc., that make up the energy supply chain in Cumbria. I also represent nuclear regions from across the UK on the Nuclear Industry Council. And relevant and pertinent to this group, work with an organisation called the Northwest Nuclear Arc, which works across the nuclear system, for want of a better way of describing it, from North Wales into Cheshire, into Lancashire, and right through to Cumbria, and that brings together the full nuclear fuel cycle. I wanted to sort of first touch on the question, and obviously the whole conversation that we're having here today around that way to net zero. And as I understand it, I have the opportunity to work with a lot of energy leaders across different sectors. The pivot to net zero, essentially pivoting away from fossils into a clean energy system, I think as many others of the speakers have said so far, is absolutely massive. As I understand it, none of the assets that are generating today in the UK will be generated in 2050. So obviously that's a huge challenge and a huge opportunity. Now, looking at that through the lens of local communities and place, what I think when I start thinking about how we can work better together is how we can really understand how we bring the levelling up and the power of social license to operate, how we can actually leverage that to best advantage. So it's one thing for the region to, decarbonise quickly and have those targets that actually get us there before 2050. But what would we as a region do to contribute to the bigger challenge? So how can we work better together to develop new technologies, to use those strengths in the different places across the Northwest? And so my experience is in Cumbria, and I know that we have significant assets in the nuclear space, in our nuclear places, in our communities, that could be leveraged significantly to deliver the baseload electricity required to meet net zero, but also to be part of the clean hydrogen generation as well. So I believe in that working better together space. One thing that we need to really consider is how do we across the Northwest better understand in our different communities where our strengths are and what our overarching value propositions would be to those green investors. How can we tell those really positive stories and those positive narratives that the investors are looking to engage with? A final thought on alliancing. So as I said, the cluster's been around for quite some time in this partnerships, alliancing, collaborative space. It's been around for 17 years. And recently, we've been working with local partners across Cumbria to develop a new type of alliancing model called the Invest in Cumbria Alliance. And what that essentially is designed to do is to create a platform across which politicians, local government, business can have that joined up conversation with potential inward investors, those green developers, to look at how we can bring their requirements as a developer and the needs of a local community. So social value, thinking about the new Social Value Act and also the increase in ESG requirements on inward investors, how we start to bring those two things together. So what the investor needs, what the developer needs, and what the community can offer. So not only would we have the generating assets and the distributing assets, etc., within the communities, but what we're also doing is helping to deliver against the levelling up. So the skills within the local community, bringing the education to the table, the supply chain opportunities, doing more to develop the local supply chain, make them more competitive, get them into the broader opportunities that those developers could bring. So my final thought really is, as a region, are we going to be a passenger on this journey to net zero, or are we going to be a driver that's going to bring solutions and capabilities and opportunities and exports, etc., to the table? Thanks, Miranda.
Thank you very much, Ivan. I thought there was a really important point you made about how do we communicate to those green investors about the innovation opportunities, how do we get them to support the commercialization, the design and the build of those technologies. I mean, that's really vital. So moving on, we'll take the questions at the end of the panel. Could we hear next, please, from Emma Degg, the CEO of the Northwest Business Leadership Team? Thanks, Emma.
Thank you, Miranda, and I'll be quicker than 5 minutes, hopefully, because I think we need to hear from Carl. And actually, I think the reason that I believe the Northwest is a lot further ahead than many other places is because of many of the leaders who are on this call, who are stepping up and just getting on with things. And I'd suggest that, yes, there's lots of helpful things coming from government, and we really appreciate particularly the relationships that we're developing with the new BEIS Greater Manchester outfit, but there's a lot we can get on and do for ourselves, and frankly, that's what this region is always known for anyway. So firstly, it really helps when talking to investors and others to talk about the work that Electricity North West and Keynote and Spen have been doing. It's detailed roadmap stuff that provides some certainty, and that's really important. We launched Net Zero Northwest, a new company that Carl chairs, and I'm sure he'll say more about that in the summer. But it is worth saying that was launched by 5 local enterprise partnerships, Mayors Burnham and Rotherham, and the Secretary of State, Kwasi Kwarteng, said, when you think net zero, you think Northwest. So I think we're doing pretty well. The difficulty is making sure that we now get on and do that really granular work. Because I think the truth is, this isn't hard, but it is complicated. We're asked all the time, what's the one energy source that's going to sort this out? What's the one simple message? And what's come through every speaker on the call so far is there isn't one, but it's about us having that detailed roadmap, investing in all of the right things, and keeping very much a focus on what's going to be commercial and investors, because the money is out there. We just need to make sure that we're collaborating effectively and telling the stories in the right way. The one thing I would say, levelling up will not happen, and access to those jobs will not happen just by accident. It didn't happen just by accident, and we failed in lots of ways when it came to offshore wind. It's only by working really closely, the investment community, local authorities, our mayoralties and so on, that we will tie this up in place. And it was brilliant to hear Martin in particular recognising that importance of local delivery. So what I'm looking forward to is getting on to the delivery part of this, really, because we've got all the ingredients that we need. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma. And in the interest of time, I should do exactly as you said and get us straight on to Carl, so we can hear about Net Zero Northwest and what Siemens is doing. So this is Carl Ennis, the CEO of Siemens. Thank you.
Thank you, Miranda. And I will similarly probably not take the 5 minutes. A couple of points. So yes, I'm the CEO of Siemens, and Emma was kind enough there to introduce one of my other hats, which is the chair of Net Zero Northwest, which is an industrial-led grouping of businesses in the Northwest, but that started convening together with local LEPs and other local actors to answer the question of how do we get industry to net carbon zero by 2030, 2040. So a few things I would say, a couple of things I'll say. First of all, coming at this stage in the running order behind so many illustrious speakers means that my speech is thrown that across the room, because actually it's been really interesting and a positive thing, the commonality of everybody really on message with what the challenges are and what to do with it. That's the first thing I'd say. And the second thing I'd say directly to Ivan, given that a significant proportion of those generation assets have got a Siemens stamp on the side of them, I'm pretty hopeful and confident that they'll still be working in 2050. But that aside, I mean, I think what I've heard today has been really interesting, and it's a shame that Martin isn't still able to be with us just this afternoon. I think that message he talked about of a national strategy delivered locally is exactly the right answer, and I think that's worked so far, you know. But I think with that delivered locally comes a responsibility. So if the exam question is what can we do in the Northwest, that will ensure that happens, I think there's a couple of key things that will allows the Northwest to stand out. First of all, it is the diversity of opportunities that happens across the Northwest. So when we look at what is the answer to the problem, the answer is we don't quite know what technology is going, and there's not going to be one winner. But on a positive note, actually the Northwest actually has a capability and a capacity almost to deliver on any of those, whether it's nuclear, wind, tidal, smart networks, buildings, hydrogen, ammonia. All of those vectors actually are very well represented in the Northwest, and perhaps our deciding factor in the area that we need to focus on is this whole systems approach. When people tend to think about decarbonisation, they think about it in a linear step, and we've done that so far as a nation. We started with generation, then we'll start with distribution, then we'll eventually get on to buildings and et cetera, et cetera. The reality is actually that you can do it like that, but I'll tell you, it's been really expensive, because the real answer is actually you need to look at a whole systems approach, because one has an impact on the other. And the minute you try and disassociate them, you create a simpler problem, but you're not fundamentally solving the main problem. So I would say, you know, it's that ability to look at across the whole system, and that requires all the local actors to coordinate. I would say that, you know, Peter started today with what Energy Northwest have been doing. I think it's a great piece of work. I think there is a true, not all regions in the UK are the same, and I think there is a true desire to collaborate that exists in the Northwest that probably doesn't exist, from my experience, across many of the other regions. And actually some of the other regions are having big battles within the region as to who is going to be the head. And I think actually in the Northwest there is a realization that actually we can organize ourselves. If we can think about the challenge in a whole systems approach, there is an opportunity. Somebody asked about attracting money, and I think there's one thing that attracts investment, and that's stability. And I think that's another really important point. Create a long-term strategy that's delivered locally, that gives certainty. And of course, yes, we need a bit of pump priming from central and local governments to create those markets. But once those markets are created, we see success. And finally, I'll finish it by saying three things. I think we need to be bold. That message I give when given an opportunity to central government. There's a reluctance to choose winners, and I think that you can wait for markets to decide the best technology or the best solution. The reality with that is, if you wait, you will have missed a great opportunity. We need to be ambitious. Somebody else talked about the scale of the task. The Net Zero Northwest did an economic prospectus, and we estimated that industrial decarbonisation in the Northwest will cost 200 billion. I still think that's a little bit low. You multiply that by the rest of the UK, and we're talking in the trillions to spend. So when we put a couple of 100 million in, that's perhaps not the level of pump priming that we need, and we're probably not being as ambitious as we need to be. And the second thing is speed. We need to act fast, because there are two things here. One is this is going to be expensive, and Peter's absolutely right when he said at the start we need to be careful about who shoulders the burden of this cost. But it's almost impossible to avoid the fact that this is going to be an initial cost. The question is, if you act fast enough, there are huge opportunities. So we only ever look at the cost, but you've got to act fast. And then I'll finish with the offshore wind example, which is touted as real success. And Siemens were heavily involved in that, and we're very proud of our involvement in that. The reality is, if you look at the supply chain in the offshore wind environment, it is very thin. And why is that? It's because we were very reluctant to make it to choose wind. And by the time we actually got out there, others had invested heavily, and the supply chain is still a commercial environment, so it looks globally. And so the vast majority of the high-level jobs in wind are not in the UK. It will be almost impossible to fix that. And we don't want that to happen for the next technology. So acting fast is also important.
No, thank you very much, Carl. I think that's a really important point. And you raise that when you talk about whole systems involvement, but also the fact that it isn't picking one technology. The government has sequentially picked single technologies to invest in, and it isn't. It's that multiple technology. And we have the industrial heritage, we have the innovation. You know, we now need to have that broad spectrum of manufacturing capability across all of those areas. So the Northwest ambition that was in that Net Zero Northwest plan was wonderful to see, and I hope it progresses. So to our last speaker on this panel, please could we hear from Gordon Rogers, who's the Head of Long-Term Strategy at United Utilities. Thank you.
Thank you, Miranda. Afternoon, everyone. So a slightly different perspective. Happy to be able to bring a water perspective to the energy side of the net zero. And of course, if you think it through a little bit, entirely integrated between water, energy, carbon, and clean growth. And we certainly won't get clean growth unless we factor in that water perspective to this discussion as well. So loads of synergies there. From a United Utilities perspective, which for those that don't appreciate the title doesn't quite do what it does anymore, but it's the mirror to Electricity Northwest. It's the water and sewage and drainage company for the Northwest. So a FTSE 100 company with, I guess from my perspective, feeling on the front foot of climate change. And feeling it firsthand. After all, we fundamentally rely on the stable climate, and if it's too dry, like it has been at the moment over the last few months, or if it's too wet, we're there. Our operators are there firsthand, responding and feeling that, and we have been feeling that more and more, particularly over the last 10 or 15 years. So climate change is far from a future issue; it's very much here and now. But to stick with the carbon focus rather than the resilience focus, I guess I would echo everything everyone's been saying so far, of just full of opportunity. And I just really would encourage us, both through government, business and society at large, to really step up our ambition. It doesn't feel like we're running at it and unlocking these opportunities anywhere near the pace we need to at the moment. From a United Utilities perspective, 10 or 15 years of quite major investment in renewable energy generation, which has largely helped us to cut our operational emissions by 70% over the last 10 years or so. And we've recently been reviewing our approach to carbon and setting up and committing to the Science Based Targets Initiative. Delighted to be the first in the water sector to do that in the UK. So really bold ambitions for 2030 and beyond. To try and do that, and pushing way beyond the focus on energy and electricity, but right through into all sources of our carbon footprint, including into the supply chain and essential collaboration. So just to bring it to life with a few specific examples, we have been investing tens of millions, hundreds of millions over the last decade or so in renewable energy generation. So we're a hugely energy intensive sector to pump and aerate and treat water. And we now supply around 25% of our own electricity needs through primarily by digesting sewage sludge. So a nice circular process and recovering waste. There's plenty more opportunity in this space. There was a huge, one of the biggest landowners in the Northwest, and a huge portfolio of reservoir space, roof space, and other land for solar and other renewables. So there's massive opportunity there, and offering resilience and wider benefits in a very cost-effective sense. Equally, as I mentioned there, we're one of the biggest landowners in the Northwest, and that's where we source the Northwest's water from, a lot of it up in the Lake District, and therefore keeping that environment clean and healthy helps us minimise our energy demand, minimise the chemicals we need to add, the concrete and infrastructure investment that we need to make, and therefore has a multiple wins in a carbon and green growth perspective, if I can get my teeth in. going through there. So we've been doing lots on, particularly in partnership with many environmental NGOs and local community groups, to really invest in those upstream catchments, particularly from a water quality perspective. Peatland particularly has been degrading through intensive agriculture, acid rain and other pollution problems. So we've been very actively trying to reverse that and restore and hold that peatland. Of course, a massive carbon sink in its own right. So we've been actively trying to protect that, delivering loads of other recreational benefits, health and access and so on benefits, plus benefits for nature, and equally increasingly switching onto that flood agenda. How do we slow the flow up in the upstream catchments? And again, prevent pumping in our wastewater system by moving surface water around. So all sorts of opportunities there, already involved in a lot of them and been doing a lot. There's plenty more that we could and should be doing and are trying to do over the long-term future. And then just to move into the supply chain focus, which is kind of where we're more stepping it up, just to finish with, and really pushing into that innovation and collaboration space, and really trying to reach out to our supply chain, both in a direct and much more indirect sense, right through to the very far ends of the supply chain, and asking for low carbon solutions and really collaborating to innovate in low carbon solutions. For example, in fleet, the electric vehicles are coming much more mainstream, but for heavy goods where we need to move tankers of water and sludge around the region, we need more innovation on hydrogen tankers and that kind of thing. So we're very active in that space, and many other examples that I could mention. So an awful lot to go at, plenty of opportunity, and certainly an imperative. And I would say, just a cheeky close, I would welcome any views from this group on the flip side to the carbon agenda. We've got Carbon Northwest, as Carl was saying. I'm kind of toying with the idea and welcome views on whether we need an adaptation Northwest to go alongside that, and how we secure our resilience to now at least some degree of inevitable climate change. So if people would like to get in touch on that, I would be all ears. Thank you. Back to you, Miranda.
Thank you, Gordon. I think that adaptation that's a great question. I'm going to bring that back to the panel at the end of our panel. So Emma and Carl and everyone, be thinking of your sentence about that. So I'm going to raise first a question by Stephen about what are the options for small scale, or I think he's thinking of small modular reactor nuclear power plants to be deployed in large developments and power large developments across the Northwest. Ivan, can we start with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Miranda. So yeah, I was really taken by Carl's point actually about being a first mover, and we obviously missed the boat somewhat from an industrial perspective when it came to offshore wind. So there is a real opportunity with the 10-point plan as it's set out for the UK to leverage off in investments in large scale, which are absolutely needed, because you need proven technology, a proven capability that can be delivered before 2035. You go with a modular advanced capability that then really help us to activate the supply chain. We're very complementary with capabilities needed in the supply chain to be, develop modular capability build for small modular reactors, advanced modular reactors, reactors for radioisotopes. I know that's sort of separate to this discussion, but incredibly important to the UK to have its own sovereign capability there for health benefits in the future. So goes back to that systems thinking and that systems point, thinking about what we're trying to achieve. The electrons are important. The low carbon clean energy is important, but also it's important to get the economic benefit, the community benefit, and think in that sort of full comprehensive way.
No, thank you very much. Anyone else want to come in on that question? I'm watching for people unmuting. Carl.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, I think there's lots of benefits for the small modular reactors, and there's no doubt a serious question around NIMBYism, and if all of a sudden you found one at the bottom of your garden, would you be happy about it? So how do you integrate it and do that safely? But I think it's proven technology. The other thing about it is it's that repeatability, that ability to you start productionizing the building of a small nuclear facility plant, rather than a boom and bust, which is what we tend to do with the large facilities. But I'm guessing we need both. But I do think there is a really strong argument for SMRs, and a lot of that competency already exists and could just be scaled quite quickly in the UK.
Yeah, I think that's right. With thinking Northwest wise, we have the capability to build them as well, not just deploy them, to build them for the rest of the world, and of course to fuel them from Springfield. You know, that's the UK's only nuclear fuel manufacturing plant that can cope with this future need. No one else is unmuted on that, so I'm going to go to another question. I'm using that as a hint when you want to speak. Another question from Stephen, specifically to United Utilities. Have you looked at hydropower from the main supplies, as most of main supplies are gravity fed, bypassing larger mains and fitting turbines on the bypasses to generate power?
We have looked at that many times over the years, and there has been innovation in that space and so on. It's still not broken through into the cost-effective mainstream, I think, is the honest answer, but I suspect that might only be a matter of time. It's certainly there's all sorts of potential innovations, so that's just one of many. But yes, it's firmly on the visibility agenda. If people see more practical solutions and things have changed again, then one of our challenges is to keep up with the changing market of innovation as it's moving so quickly, and making sure we don't miss the pieces. I think Carl or one of the panelists was saying about, you know, jumping on those things and being agile is half the challenge here.
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, and that what Gwynne said, a lot of clever ideas don't quite hit the commercial hurdle, and I think that's another underlying challenge, that we need to start properly pricing carbon, because until you do that, some of these technologies don't actually work. So somehow we've really got to start saying there is a cost, a long-term cost of choosing what appears to be the most cost-effective now, but ultimately it won't be. And so how do you price that in so that we're making the right decisions at all levels and that will really drive innovation, and again will generate local opportunities.
And that includes properly pricing carbon from existing fossil fuel power sources. The moment we properly price that, everything else becomes affordable. So
I'd just like to say that before, but having said that out loud, I'm sure there's a lot of my business colleagues who are jumping up and down saying, you didn't mean it, Carl, you didn't mean it. I do mean it, because I do think ultimately it will drive us all in the right direction, as long as it's done in a sensible manner.
Any last words from my panel on we need an adaptation Northwest to start preparing for the inevitable adaptations we need to make?
And embracing the opportunities that go along with it, because if, again, just in the way of embracing net zero, embracing resilience and preparing now delivers all the long-term, but there are plenty of no regrets things that deliver oodles of payback value for society and business. I would love, anybody who wants to get in touch, I'm completely open, so please reach out.
Thank you, Gwynne. Emma?
I just wanted to very quickly say the Northwest has got the biggest opportunity and the biggest challenge. We can have the opposite of levelling up if we don't get energy pricing and this transition is just. We have brilliant manufacturers who, you know better than anybody, Miranda, are having a really tough time at the moment. So this has to be a conversation across sectors about how we support them to transition as well. There's another way to decarbonise. You can just close everything down, and we don't want that either.
Thank you. I think that's a perfect place to end for that panel. Thank you very much to my 4 panelists and all the questions that came in. And I'm sure there'll be more questions if we have time at the end. Thank you very much, all. And over to Lou.
Thanks, Miranda. On to our final session then, and in the spirit of being agile, we're going to be super lean with our comments and our questions, and hopefully manage to get both in. So we're going to be talking about leading the way to net zero, and we've got 2 guests that are joining us today. So obviously what we've heard today, which is brilliant, there's lots of passion on the topic and our ambition to be a UK and a global exemplar in getting there faster. And I think we're all acknowledging that, you know, this is key to the right shape of growth and recovery that we all want to achieve. We're certainly passionate about that in Greater Manchester, and as we've talked about, I've been working really closely with our colleagues in other LEPs across the Northwest to help make that a reality. I think what we all recognise is that there's a really important role for people and for business, but also for politicians. And so I'm joined today I guess, focus on the politics and the policy making aspect of this, and how we get that component of leadership right. So in a second, I'm going to come to Andrew Gwynne, who's MP for Denton and Reddish, who we saw earlier in the film, and also Councillor Philippa Williamson, who is the leader for Lancashire County Council. So the question we're going to focus on is, how can the North West ambition to go faster and to get to net zero sooner be embedded and delivered? And just as we've done before, I'm going to ask our panelists, if I can, to start by saying a few words on their thoughts on that topic. Andrew, if we could come to you first, that would be great.
Thank you very much, Lou. And for those that don't know me, I'm not just the Member of Parliament for Denton and Reddish, I'm also the chair of the Greater Manchester Westminster group that brings MPs together on Greater Manchester issues. And it's really good to be part of this cross-party panel discussing zero transition and ambitions. And I think that a lot's already been said today. And there's a fair amount of consensus on the subject so far. We all agree that we need to reach net zero as soon as possible. That's of the utmost urgency. But I think that the key to implementing long-lasting and significant change within the North West will rely on political collaboration, as well as common acknowledgement of the challenges we face and the radical steps that we need to take. Now, as a Member of Parliament within Greater Manchester, I'm incredibly proud of the steps we're taking in this city region to meet an ambitious climate and ecological targets. Greater Manchester produces roughly 3.5% of the UK's annual CO2 emissions, and I think with that comes a responsibility to lead the way on net zero. Now, in 2019, before COVID, the Greater Manchester Combined Authority launched its 5-year environment plan, which sets out a vision to reach net zero by 2038, and the short to medium term actions that we need to take to facilitate that goal. And the plan, as I remember it, is essentially focused on 5 areas: energy, transport, buildings, consumption, and the natural environment. This plan was developed in conjunction with climate scientists, and it aims to tackle the key areas of our energy consumption. It's a detailed and ambitious document, and I think a key part of the plan is the retrofitting of 61,000 homes a year to reduce heat loss, utilising hydrogen power to drive down emissions, and building a green, clean and integrated transport system. You know, if there was only one purpose for devolution, this is actually probably it. It's incredibly ambitious and cross-cutting, and I think we should be very excited about where this net zero policy can lead us as a city region and the wider Northwest region beyond, and the tangible benefits it can have on the day-to-day lives of people across the county and the region. Part of that is going to have to be strong collaborative approaches with the private sector, with local councils, with researchers and with policymakers. And I think the key component of the plan is the way it rejects a one-size-fits-all approach to reaching net zero. I think as a city region, we've recognised that the economic and social makeup of each district in Greater Manchester is very different, and therefore each area needs a bespoke plan to yield the best results. And that's why working with each district to draft an energy programme, helping each local area identifying the most promising options for decarbonisation, GMCA are essentially applying the logic of devolution to climate policy, which I think is both unique and very progressive. There is, of course, a lot of work to be done, and the onus is on GMCA to continue to monitor how the plan is going and to adapt it accordingly if vital metrics aren't met. And that is in many ways the benefit of having a 5-year plan, because once those 5 years are up, we can look at where we are, decide on where we're going and how we move forward. We shouldn't be afraid of changing or accelerating the policy if we aren't getting the desired results, or if new technologies come on the scene that means that we can speed up aspects of the programme. In terms of getting to net zero sooner in the Northwest, I think the key is in utilising connections across the private, public and research sectors, a holistic approach to net zero policy. It's probably the only way that we'll be able to make the fundamental changes needed to create that profound impact. It means giving local authorities the tools and the funding to find greener solutions, getting private companies around the table, being led by the science and experts, and it all needs to happen alongside a far more ambitious net zero government programme. So these are my thoughts on where our net zero ambitions are, the work that needs to continue and indeed accelerate over the next few years, and also the work that parliamentarians have to do to convince other parliamentarians and government that this isn't just an important agenda, it's an agenda that we can't afford to slip on.
Thanks so much, Andrew. And I scribbled down, there's only one purpose for devolution. So we'll maybe come back to that. And I know we've got a question that I'd like to sneak in that does talk to your point around transport and the role of transport. So hopefully we'll manage to squeeze some time for that. Councillor Williamson, if I can come to you next, that would be brilliant.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So what I thought I'd do was give a quick overview of our approach to tackling net zero in Lancashire. And as I was putting it together, I was kind of reflecting on what the lessons there in terms of accelerating the pace of change were. So I'll just touch on those as well. So Lancashire County Council's approach to net zero is fundamental to our corporate strategy and to our economic strategy. And we know that the transition to net zero will help us to have more sustainable economy and create opportunities for innovation and growth. But we also crucially understand that it involves a huge amount of change. We've heard about that this afternoon during this webinar. And we've got to balance the costs and benefits of all of that across a large, diverse social and economic geographical area. But all that said, we are really up for the challenge, and we've already made significant progress, range of investment packages and projects to support our agenda. But one key lesson from that really comes out of it all is that pivotal to making all of this work is having really strong partnerships and collaborative working. We've heard that before. I absolutely endorse that. We need to work with local authorities, businesses, universities, other agencies, and of course, Electricity North West, who we have a great partnership with. But to go further and faster, we really need, this sounds like getting back to basics, but we really need to better understand the sustainability and net zero opportunities for us across Lancashire in particular. So as part of our offer to government for greater powers, flexibility, investment as part of a county deal, we'll be incorporating all our ambitions for getting to net zero. And we're informing that plan with a range of research that we commissioned about 12 months ago. And it has 4 specific environmental reviews in it. And I'll just touch on those because it's all about us really having the latest up-to-date knowledge and data about the challenges. So the first is, what is the state of the environment? What is Lancashire's environment looking at? And we need a sort of dashboard of indicators to help us with that. We've got research underway on our carbon reduction pathways. We want an emissions baseline, and we want pathways to emissions reduction targets. And we want options around how we could achieve that. And again, picking up on the theme from this afternoon, I don't think one size will fit all on that. There'll be lots of different options available to us. We've also got a research stream underway around climate resilience. We want to know where all the disruption could occur, especially dependencies between different infrastructure systems. So we want to have a clear picture of that, and we want to know what's the best way of mitigating some of the risks around it. And the final strand of our research is on renewables deployment. We want to really understand the current level of renewable energy use in Lancashire and have a list of options to increase that use, obviously, but also how we can strengthen deployment of renewable energy systems across the county and across the region. So all of that data and analysis is helping us to inform our thinking. And what's going to come out of that, I'm absolutely sure, is a huge array of opportunities that we are going to have to prioritise. But just as an example, you know, we might want to do more local area energy planning. We've heard a bit about that. We might want to create a green housing programme to retrofit existing properties. We might want to focus on carbon capture through nature. You know, we've heard about here in Lancashire, we've got very high levels of green infrastructure, and you know, we need to know how we can best harness that and use it. And I suppose just reflecting on all of that, you know, how we as politicians can help accelerate the pace of change. At the exam question that you set us, I think the first lesson is invest in and learn from the latest, best research that you can get. I think the second one is attract powers and funding so that you can implement that research. It's no good having all those ideas. You've got to do something with them, and that takes resources. But by doing so, you're innovating yourself. You're keeping that process going. Absolutely, you need to be flexible and agile. As we've heard before, there may be many solutions to some of the challenges we face, and we need to be able to react to that and follow the best solutions, and recognise that you can't do it all alone. So develop and maximise those partnerships because they can help you develop and implement them. The one thing that I think politicians can really help on is involving and communicating and engaging with the residents of our lovely area. We know there is increasing support for this agenda, but at a local level, people need to know not just what they can do individually, but they need to know about some of the bigger stuff that's going on that's perhaps not so visible to them in their everyday lives, but is really, really important, and that they're helping us to implement. So that's my take on some of the lessons. I hope that's helpful to everyone.
That's brilliant. That's really helpful. And also, you know, it would be remiss of us not to comment in the spirit of going faster. Lancashire's 2030 target is is particularly true to that ambition, isn't it? So brilliant. I'm going to try and squeeze in a couple of questions if I can, just before we move to the final section. So I had one quick question, and that I was really interested whilst we had you both to get your thoughts on, which is that interrelationship between the agenda that we're talking about today in net zero and the levelling up agenda, and whether we think we can get both of those moving faster together. So really interested just to hear your thoughts, if we can, Andrew, and then over to you, Philippa.
Well, the two are so massively interlinked because firstly, we're talking about the jobs of tomorrow. We're talking about, you know, investing in new technologies, and the Northwest needs to be a leader in some of these green technologies that are developing, are emerging. There's no reason why we can't lead the next industrial revolution, which is going to be the environmental industrial revolution, in the same way as we led the first industrial revolution. But also it massively links into the levelling up agenda, because whether it's housing, whether it's transport, whether it's jobs, whether it's the wider environment, it all links into levelling up, bringing our communities up to the level that we want to see them, bringing investment in those communities up. So, you know, increasing use of public transport and active travel modes, phasing out fossil fueled private vehicles, replacing them with zero emission alternatives, decarbonising freight transport, shifting freight to rail and water, upgrading our bus fleet so that they're zero emissions. All these things, tackling the most polluting vehicles on our roads, all these things lead into and link into the levelling up agenda. The two can't be separated, and actually if we're going to move at pace, we need to make sure that both the levelling up agenda, investing in infrastructure and in jobs, links directly into the environmental agenda.
Brilliant. Thanks, Andrew. Philippa, I'm going to come to you and ask you the same question, but we've also got a specific question around to the head of LCC. What part of will the circular economy play in the net zero economy? So if we could tackle both of those together, that would be great.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree that the levelling up agenda and a drive towards net zero are they're totally linked. There is absolute synergy between them. You need to get your economic policy to really wrap itself around this, because it's going to make such a massive difference. If we really want to make change in terms of the future for jobs and our economy, you need to progress both your ambitions in parallel. We have the skills, we have the people, we have the innovation, we have a massive innovation base within the county, and we need to tap into that. We need to support it and promote it, and similarly we need to ensure that the skills agenda that runs alongside that, so that we can sustain it, goes along with it. So I see the two things as totally interlinked, and I think we're in a really great place to be able to hook onto that, and I think we've heard that from all of the different partners across this webinar this afternoon, where there is a great consensus amongst us, and a lot of energy and willingness to bring the two things in terms of economic policy development and net zero together, and that's what the levelling up agenda is all about.
Great, thanks, Philippa. And did you want to come back specifically on the role around circular economy in the net zero economy? There was a question posted for you in the chat. You might feel you've covered that already.
Oh, I've lost my sound. Sorry. Yeah.
Don't worry. Well, maybe squeeze in the last question then. Okay. Just if we can, we had a question from Brian Love at Connected Cities, who kindly submitted this way ahead of the session. So I want to make sure we get it in. So his question is, given that transport is the sector with the largest emissions, that rail is the least polluting travel mode by far, and the RTPI has calculated that to stand any chance of achieving net zero requires a shift to public transport far greater than any achieved so far, should we be encouraging growth only around station and the electrification of as many rail lines as possible? Andrew, I'll maybe come to you, because you did talk a little bit around the importance of transport in how we deliver in the pace and the time.
Yeah, transport is key, and you have to break that down to strategic transport, so that you have good links between cities and between other modes of connectivity, whether that's airports, ports, and so on, so that you can get goods in and out, but do it in a sustainable or a more sustainable way than road transport. But we've also got to invest in local transport. Now, look, you're talking to an MP here who's got 2 stations that are served by 1 train a week in one direction only. That is absolutely crazy. It wouldn't be stood for in London rather than in Greater Manchester. Our public transport isn't what it should be, certainly a million miles from what it needs to be. And that's why I do think, going back to the earlier question about levelling up and meeting our zero emissions targets, we've really got to invest in transport. Transport is a big key to this. And rail transport and light rail is a massive part of that. So, we've got to have more investment so that people can get around. And yes, just like in the old days when you built a road, the factories would come alongside the roads. If we invest in decent modern public transport, particularly on rail corridors, that investment will follow along those rail corridors as well. Absolutely crucial that we link it all up.
Brilliant, Andrew. Philippa, anything you'd like to add on that point before we wrap up this part of the session?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously rail it's important, but I don't necessarily agree that we should encourage growth purely around stations. I think we should encourage electrification, but because I think it's making some assumptions around where we'll be on vehicle emissions. I don't think that they will continue with their current trend, and by the time any new development came along, then it may not be quite so sensible to have put it all around a train station. But I think we should also think about all the other modes of transport that help accessibility. So, you should think about walking, you should think about cycling, you should think about bus transport as well as rail transport. And rail travel is great for many intercity journeys. It's not always so brilliant for accessing, within urban areas, across towns, and in areas that aren't perhaps so well served by rail. And we've got quite a few places like that in Lancashire, I have to say. So, I think a more balanced approach to that. I don't think I don't think you can leap to that one answer. I think it's a more nuanced approach to development.
Fantastic. Thank you both so much. So thank you to our panelists, and also to everybody for the lively chat and engagement that we've been having going on whilst we're talking. So I'm going to hand back now to Paul Bircham for the final section and to wrap up today. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much, Lou. It's great final session there, and thank you to everybody who spoke today. It's brilliant to hear from everybody today. I took so much out of the discussion. I've got pages and pages of notes here, but just a few very key things that I took from the debate today. Real focus and energy and determination on achieving net zero ambitions, and no debate about that whatsoever. It's all about the energy and enthusiasm being applied to how we achieve it. And where do we focus first? So that's great. Lots of discussion about local area energy planning and looking to build that further. And that's something that I'm sure that at Electricity North West we can help all of the local authorities with. We've already made a good start in some areas on that, and there's more to do. Lots of calls for making sensible choices for investment today. And then having flexibility to respond as the undoubtedly uneven path towards net zero evolves for us, and having that flexibility to allow us to respond at the right times is really important. And I think that's very strongly linked with lots of calls to ensure that we make this transition as just as possible, and that we think about the impact on those, whether that is businesses or end consumers who are least able to pay, and we address those issues as well. So I think there's an intrinsic link between that flexibility and going at the pace that we need to, and ensuring that we're not creating a bill before we have to when we think about the just transition. So loads for us to think about and take from the discussion today. But what I would like to do is to offer the opportunity to Steve Mcmahon, Deputy Director of Electricity Distribution at Ofgem, to provide his sort of summing up comments and thoughts for us as we finalise our business plan to support this region's ambition towards net zero, and submit it to him on the 1st of December. Steve?
Thanks, Paul. And thanks for that introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Steve McMahon, as Paul said. I run Ofgem's RIIO-ED2 price controls. That's been mentioned a few times, I think, this afternoon. I think what we've heard in the last couple of hours is a great articulation of the scale of challenge, the changes that need to happen across the energy system, and the opportunities that we face. I think clearly over the next 10 years in particular, the energy sector will undergo a significant technology-driven transformation as we move to a low-carbon energy system. So you're going to have more clean power, more EVs on our roads, heat pumps or hydrogen to support our heating needs. And all of these technologies will need to be seamlessly integrated onto the energy system. So the challenge of that is significant. I think probably the biggest changes to the design and operation of our networks in over half a century. But I think the opportunities for a smart, flexible, data-enabled, low-carbon energy system are huge, and we need to maximise those. And I think that's something that we are seeing recognised in ENWL's draft business plan for the ED2 period. Electricity demand, how we generate the electricity to support that demand, consumer behaviour are all going to change, and that will mean major upgrades to our energy networks to accommodate it. For Ofgem, that's something we've been clear that we will support, I think in line with needs across the country. We don't want the pathways to net zero to be held up by a lack of network capacity. I think put simply, if people can't connect an EV quickly, get a heat pump installed, or connect some other low carbon technology because of network constraints, then I'll not have done my job properly. And I think these changes come and mean that we need to be more flexible and agile about how we regulate. That will mean more flexibility in how and when investments can be made over time, much greater coordination with national and regional government, which, as we've heard today, is where many of the main decisions for decarbonisation will actually be taken. And that point about a decarbonised, decentralised energy system is absolutely right. But it has to be one that continues to meet the needs for energy consumers. I think that's a key point. I think we must keep protecting consumers in this transition and making sure we keep the costs as low as we possibly can. That transition to net zero is going to affect every part of society, and at a time when we're seeing wholesale energy prices increasing significantly, that's going to put pressure on bills. And as we recover from the pandemic, it's something that we just need to have make sure that we keep our eye on. Over the next 15 months, we're going to be determining the funding settlements for the ED2 controls, including for Paul and his team at ENWL. So ED2 is a nationally and locally significant project, and one of the main ones within the overall Ofgem programme. And we know that the decisions that we take will ultimately go a long way to accelerating the transition to a zero carbon economy and making sure our networks are prepared for that. So that process has been ongoing for some time now. It's felt like a long time. Lots of you have been engaged in that along the way, whether it's various consultations on our side, the production of the business plans, and there's just a little bit of time to go yet. So we do look forward to you continuing to get engaged in that process as we finalise these investment plans. So that's probably all I would say, Paul.
Thanks very much, Steve. That's great. So we're coming right to the end of the this event today, and I just wanted to express my thanks to everybody who's been speaking today, and to each of the three co-chairs who've guided us through this event. And so I'm going to give the final comments to them. I'm going to invite each of the chairs to come up with their one ask that's come from today for either for Ofgem or government to help the Northwest lead the way to net zero. And we'll do it in the order that they chaired their panels. So can we start with Jo, please?
Yeah, thank you, Paul. And I'm, as always, going to be really cheeky. So for Ofgem, can we actually have subsidy for EV charging in areas that are not viable? And also, can we change the rules so that fit-in photovoltaics doesn't actually increase the rateable value of a property? So spend more money and you actually pay more. And very quickly for government, don't lose sight of how important the Northwest is. I was personally disappointed that the 10-point plan barely mentioned us with our fabulous offer. We need grant support to encourage businesses to decarbonise. They have never been so cash depleted. And finally, after waiting for a long time for large-scale nuclear, can we have a financing tool? Thank you, Paul. It was only 1 minute.
Thanks, Jo. Miranda, beat that.
Thank you. Two things. One is to have the green economic stimulus, the investment for that manufacturing of low carbon technologies, which we do so well. There's a huge part of our levelling up opportunity for the Northwest. And secondly, real government policies to help drive the take-up of low carbon technologies. So procurement policies, planning policies, retrofitting policies. Let's have those mandated so that we really have to adopt those policies and make the change we need to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Miranda. And Lou, can I over to you for the last one?
I'll keep it even simpler. I have one ask of both of the above, which is an investment in skills and an investment at pace. We've seen 10 years change in 10 months. We've seen the death of industry on one side of it and the growth opportunity on the other. We need to reskill people and repopulate to drive the growth that we want to at the pace that we want to. So all about skills for me.
Thank you very much, Lou. So great contributions from all of our speakers today. Thank you to everybody who attended this event. Loads of questions in the chat. I hope we've been able to address a number of those either directly through chat or through the discussion from all of our panelists. Brilliant panelists and speakers, brilliant chairs, and thanks to Ofgem for both opening and closing the event for us as well today. Thank you to everybody who's attended for your participation and your attention. Thanks very much and goodbye.